Buffalo can receive multiple feet of snowfall during a single storm, while towns only a few miles away remain almost untouched. The lakes are not passive landscapes. They actively manufacture climate. For most people living nearby, though, none of this feels dramatic. In summer, the shorelines look calm, peaceful, ordinary. Tourists rent boats, families swim near the beaches, waterfront houses sell for millions of dollars. And then, November arrives. Lake Superior behaves less like a lake and more like an inland sea. At its deepest point, it descends more than 1,300 feet. Its surface area alone is roughly the size of Austria. And over centuries of navigation, thousands of ships have disappeared into it. Some estimates place the total number of wrecks across the Great Lakes between 6,000 and 10,000. The Edmund Fitzgerald sank here in 1975 during a single storm. 29 crew members died. Not during the 19th century, not during the age of wooden ships, in modern North America. Because the physics of the lakes do not negotiate. Waves behave differently here than they do in the open ocean. The water is shallower, the wave patterns tighter, more violent, more chaotic against large hulls. The system kills efficiently and without warning. And yet, the same system that destroys also creates. Nearly 60 million people live within the Great Lakes Basin. Together, the American and Canadian economies built around these waters generate over $6 trillion in economic output. If the basin were its own country, it would rank among the largest economies on Earth. That economic gravity was transformed permanently in 1825 with the completion of the Erie Canal. Before the canal, moving cargo inland was brutally expensive. Farmers in the Midwest could produce enormous harvests and still struggle to move goods profitably toward eastern markets. Then the canal connected Lake Erie directly to the Hudson River system. Transport costs collapsed almost overnight. Suddenly, the interior of the continent was connected cheaply and efficiently to the Atlantic Ocean. And that single engineering project shifted the center of American economic power for generations. Cities exploded along the lakes: Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Toronto. Industrial growth followed the water: steel, manufacturing, grain, shipping. But rapid growth also created dangerous problems. Chicago learned that faster than almost anywhere else. As the city expanded during the 19th century, sewage and industrial waste flowed directly into Lake Michigan, the same lake supplying the city's drinking water. Disease spread repeatedly through the growing population: cholera, typhoid, contaminated water killing thousands. Engineers proposed a solution so aggressive it still sounds absurd today. They reversed the Chicago River. At the time, it sounded impossible. Rivers were supposed to follow gravity. Chicago decided gravity was negotiable. Through canals and massive excavation projects, engineers permanently redirected the river away from Lake Michigan and toward the Mississippi Basin. They did not eliminate the waste problem. They moved it permanently. And in many ways, that decision perfectly captures how humans interact with this system. Immediate survival first, long-term consequences later. That same logic appears again farther north at Sault Ste. Marie. The Soo Locks allow ships to bypass violent rapids between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, moving tens of millions of tons of cargo every year through one of the most important industrial choke points in North America. Most people have never heard of them, but if the locks stopped functioning, supply chains across the continent would feel the shock almost immediately. Steel production, automotive manufacturing, industrial shipping. Entire sectors depend on a narrow passage in northern Michigan, and eventually, the lakes open themselves to the world. The St. Lawrence Seaway transformed the region into a direct extension of the global economy. Cargo vessels from overseas can now travel deep into the North American interior, entirely by water. A ship leaving Duluth, Minnesota can travel more than 2,000 miles to the Atlantic Ocean without ever leaving the system. And hidden inside that system is another layer most people never consider. The Great Lakes contain more than 35,000 islands. Some are isolated rock formations. Others support permanent communities. Manitoulin Island alone is large enough to contain towns, forests, and more than 100 lakes within the island itself. Some of those lakes contain islands of their own. It sounds almost fictional until you look at the map. Then you realize the scale of the system is so large that it creates geography inside geography. And that is the real story here. The Great Lakes are not passive resources sitting quietly in the middle of a continent. They are an active system with their own logic, their own climate, their own economic gravity. They carved themselves into existence with ice. They built industrial empires. They reshaped rivers. They generate storms powerful enough to erase entire coastlines beneath snow. And now they contain one of the most strategically important resources on Earth: fresh water. 30 million people already rely on the lakes directly for drinking water. As climate pressure intensifies globally, that number and the strategic importance of the system itself will only grow. Most people barely think about the Great Lakes unless they live near them. Even then, they are often treated as scenery, a horizon line, a local landmark, something permanent. But the system is not finished. It is still moving, still draining slowly toward the Atlantic one step at a time. And every city built along its shoreline exists inside a geographic machine that began operating thousands of years before human civilization arrived there, and will likely continue long after modern political systems disappear. The question is not whether the Great Lakes matter. The question is whether the people depending on them understand the system well enough to protect it before pressure forces them to. It did not happen all at once. It happened over 10,000 years, slowly, then completely. And by the time humans arrived to name it, measure it, and build cities along its edges, the system was already ancient, already finished, already more powerful than anything they would later construct on top of it. Forget what you think you know about the middle of North America. This is not an empty inland region sitting quietly between two coasts that actually matter. The Great Lakes are one of the most consequential geographic systems on Earth, not because of what was built beside them, because of what created them, what fills them, and what happens if they begin to fail. Everything starts with ice, not seasonal ice, not mountain glaciers. A continental mass of ice nearly 2 miles thick, pressing down on the surface of North America, with enough force to physically bend the Earth's crust beneath it. The Laurentide ice sheet did not simply cover the continent. It moved, slowly, relentlessly, grinding southward across the bedrock, carving enormous basins into the land over thousands of years. This was not erosion in the ordinary sense. This was geological demolition. And when the climate shifted and the ice finally began to retreat, those basins remained behind, empty, deep, waiting. The meltwater had nowhere else to go, so it filled them. And in geological terms, the Great Lakes appeared almost instantly. 10,000 years ago, this system did not exist in its current form. Today, it contains roughly 21% of all the surface fresh water on Earth. That transformation happened in the blink of an eye, and the scale is difficult to visualize. 6 quadrillion gallons of fresh water spread across 5 interconnected basins, stretching more than 700 miles across the continent. If all of it were somehow released at once across the lower 48 states, the United States would disappear beneath roughly 10 feet of water. Every highway, every farm, every city, gone. That is not metaphor. It is arithmetic. But this is where most people misunderstand the lakes, because this is not really 5 lakes. It is one system, and systems have structure. The structure of the Great Lakes is essentially a staircase. Lake Superior sits at the top, hundreds of feet above sea level. Water descends gradually through connecting channels into Lakes Michigan and Huron, then farther downward into Erie, and then the system reaches a cliff. The Niagara Escarpment forces an enormous volume of water through a sudden elevation drop more than 300 feet high. Most people think of Niagara Falls as a landmark. It is not. It is a pressure valve. The falls exist because an inland freshwater system the size of a small ocean is trying to move toward the Atlantic through a narrow geographic bottleneck. The waterfall is the symptom. The system is the cause. But the lakes do more than move water. They move weather. As autumn arrives, the lakes hold on to summer heat far longer than the surrounding land. When cold Arctic air sweeps south from Canada across the relatively warm surface water, it absorbs enormous quantities of moisture. And then, the atmosphere releases it all at once. Entire cities can disappear beneath snow, generated directly by the lakes themselves. And pressure is already building, not slowly, not gradually, all at once. Lake Erie is the shallowest of the 5 lakes. It warms fastest. And in recent decades, toxic algae blooms have spread across its surface with increasing frequency and scale. In 2014, the city of Toledo, Ohio, lost access to its drinking water for 3 days. Not because of a drought, not because of a flood, because the lake turned toxic. 500,000 people could not drink the water sitting directly outside their window. That event was not an anomaly, it was a signal. The same agricultural runoff that feeds the American Midwest, the fertilizers, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, drains into the lakes and feeds something else entirely. Algae that consumes oxygen, algae that produces toxins, algae that closes beaches, kills fish, and shuts down municipal water systems, serving millions of people. The lakes absorb everything upstream sends them. And upstream sends a great deal. But toxic algae is only one pressure point. Invasive species are another. Zebra mussels arrived in the ballast water of a cargo ship from Europe in the late 1980s. They were not supposed to be here, but biology does not respect shipping regulations. Within years, zebra mussels had spread across the entire system. They filter enormous quantities of water, stripping out the plankton that forms the base of the food chain. Native fish populations collapsed in regions where they had been stable for centuries. The ecosystem that supported commercial fishing for generations began to fracture. Then came the Asian carp, a species introduced into American waterways decades ago to control algae and fish farms. They escaped, they multiplied, and they have been moving steadily toward the Great Lakes ever since, threatening to overwhelm native species and permanently restructure the biological foundation of the system. Billions of dollars have been spent on barriers, monitoring systems, and emergency interventions to keep them out. So far, they have held. But biological pressure does not stop. It accumulates, and the lakes are absorbing pressure from every direction simultaneously. From above, through a changing climate that disrupts ice cover, alters evaporation rates, and shifts precipitation patterns across the entire basin. From below, through legacy industrial contamination embedded in sediment that took decades to deposit and will take decades more to address. From the edges, through urban expansion, agricultural intensification, and infrastructure systems that treat the lakes as an input rather than a system to be maintained. The lakes have survived all of it so far. But survival is not the same as stability, and stability is not the same as permanence. There is one more layer that almost never enters the public conversation: water rights. The Great Lakes Compact, signed in 2008 by 8 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces, legally restricts the diversion of Great Lakes water outside the basin. It exists because the pressure to move that water elsewhere was already real. Cities in the American Southwest are running out of groundwater. Agricultural regions across the plains are drawing down aquifers that took thousands of years to fill. Climate projections suggest that water scarcity across large parts of North America will intensify significantly over the coming decades. And sitting in the middle of the continent is a system containing 21% of the planet's surface fresh water. The political pressure to access that water will not decrease. It will increase, quietly at first, then visibly, then urgently. The compact holds for now, but compacts are legal documents, and legal documents exist inside political systems. And political systems change, which means the real question hanging over the Great Lakes is not ecological. It is not economic. It is not even infrastructural. It is this: who decides what happens to the water? Because whoever controls that decision controls something more valuable than oil, more essential than rare earth metals, more strategically significant than any single commodity the modern economy has ever organized itself around. Fresh water in a drying world is not a resource. It is power, and the Great Lakes are the largest concentration of that power on the surface of the earth. The system began with ice. It will end with a question, and the answer has not been written yet.